I'm Loki Karuna, and this is TRILLOQUY. Thanks so much for tuning in to the podcast built to decolonize classical music. It's been a great March. Hope your March has been phenomenal. March 31st, as I record this, a conclusion to Women's History Month 2026. Of course, we celebrate women year-round, but it's been great for me to focus on spiritually, just thinking about all the women who have made it happen historically and today. So shout out to all of the women doing the work to help decolonize classical music as well. I have a phenomenal woman to feature on this opus of the podcast, Maestro Jeri Lynne Johnson. A little from her website here. Jeri's career is marked by a series of historic firsts. In 2005, she became the first African-American woman to win an international conducting prize when she was awarded the Taki Alsop Conducting Fellowship. Since then, she's led many of the world's leading orchestras and opera companies, including the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic, and Santa Fe Opera. In 2008, Jeri founded the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra as a model for a 21st century orchestra, one that embodies modern democratic values. I'll have Jeri's website in the description for you to learn more about her. We first met at the Kennedy Center almost a decade ago on some programming that, just embodies the work that we all have been doing for so long. There have been lots of panels, lots of dialogues, lots of convenings, and the work continues. Jeri's here not only to talk about her career and her work with the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra, but an upcoming collaboration with the Gateways Music Festival. The Gateways Music Festival is partnering with the Dance Theatre of Harlem to present Firebird, and Jeri Lynne Johnson has the honor of leading the orchestra in this historic first set of performances. So hope you enjoy this dialogue. To get us into our chat, here's a little excerpt from the Firebird in case you might be unfamiliar with this piece. See you on the other side.
I don't always feel like fighting and battling has to be a negative thing. You know, I feel like we fight and we battle in different ways. And so for me, artistic freedom and joy and embracing that and protecting that and pursuing that is a form of battling. I think it's a form of battling cynicism. It's a form of battling oppression. It's a form of battling control. And so, existence is resistance. To the extent that I continue to be a Black woman conductor who's continued to work and succeed in her career and do interesting things, and support my daughter through my work and my art, I consider that to be a success. And I think being able to be recognized for who I am and what I do sort of off the podium. I've been doing a lot of public speaking in some unusual circles, and that part of my work continues to grow. And Loki, we wear many hats, and people are always like, how do you do all these things? And it doesn't feel like these are separate things. It feels like this is all the same work of, bringing people to light and joy through music, and using music to help people connect to one another. So it's all the same work in whatever way that we do it. So when I speak about myself and Black Pearl and being a Black woman conductor and how I got to be where I am and how I continue to work to get to where I want to go. Mm-hmm. I'm always amazed that other people find value in that message, find it inspiring. And those messages are always just about, again, the joy of battling for the freedom of my spirit and my soul and what God has planned for me.
That's beautiful. When you talk about all these different hats, as I was sort of catching up on your profile, visiting the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra website, going back to your bio, I read the word composer. That's something that I didn't realize. I wonder what that work has looked like for you.
Oh, Loki. I might have to take that out, but thank you for your thorough work. on that. Um, I'm a very slow composer, and so I haven't done anything like that for a while. But weirdly enough, I think the last piece I wrote was when my daughter was about a year old, and it was a fun challenge for me to see what I could do during nap times, which is as all new moms, like that's always, you should rest when the baby rests. Oh no, that's when I've got a sharp hour and a half to just really focus and get the laundry done, get the house clean the house, get everything ready for the next thing, then try to, do everything I need to do for my actual job. And so that's the last time I wrote a piece. And so I don't, I'm certainly not at the level of like Jesse Montgomery or Carlos Simon or anybody like that. So I would never consider myself a composer in that regard. But I do enjoy creating for myself and pursuing that. But that's really all that's for. But thank you for noticing that. I appreciate that.
I think that counts nonetheless.
Okay, thanks.
And before we turn on the mics here, we were talking about a new work that the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra will be performing in the coming months. What I think about is since 2020 and all of those days, we have been seeing some change, some movement, even if incremental, when it comes to marginalized voices coming to the front. But I'm also very happy to see more and more orchestras of all sizes engaging living composers and really engaging the idea of commissioning new music. All of that, of course, sits beside people's various respects and obligations to the canon, as it were. So I was wondering how you personally, when it comes to your work with the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra or otherwise, what's your engagement or philosophy around approaching, the canon, again, as it were, and balancing that with an attention to new music and living composers?
Yeah, I think it's such an important question, and you're right. Traditionally, like smaller orchestras have, interestingly enough, been at sort of the vanguard of commissioning and taking risks with underrepresented composers, and it's been nice to see that sort of filter up to the bigs in a way. And so I think, as Black Pearl has aged into, we're sort of in midlife right now. I consider. We're like almost maybe 18 years old at this point, which I can't even really believe. But I think because of the reputation that we've built up in the classical music community, we tend to punch above our weight class from a budget standpoint. Like we're small but mighty in that regard. And so being able to really leverage that position, I think, puts us in a unique position to be able to really help underrepresented composers get exposed to larger orchestras. And so we've done a couple things that you mentioned. We have our first commission, which we're really excited about, with composer Courtney Bryan, who I've done some of her works. And she had an idea. And so we've been able to sort of integrate this into our America and Philadelphia 250 sort of programming around exploring the life of Rebecca Cox Jackson, who was an African-American woman who was free about the time of kind of post-revolutionary America, like just around there. And she started an all-Black Shaker community in Philadelphia. And she was also a queer woman. She'd had a quote unquote companion with her after she left her husband, who was this other woman who stayed with her for decades. And so just this I'd never heard of this woman being, living in Philadelphia. And so again, it's sort of revealing these histories of Black people who've contributed to the founding of the country and the cultural life of the country in its earliest days that maybe people had never heard about. And so really uncovering these stories of America in its early days, I thought was really important. So we're really honored to be commissioning a work by Courtney Bryan about the life of Rebecca Cox Jackson. And on the other hand, we'd started a couple years ago a project called Kaleidoscope, which is funded by New Music USA. So we're really grateful for that. And we've had some other funding, which is really around identifying very talented composers from across the country who just need exposure and opportunities. And one of the things that I struggle with as someone who does a lot of new music and world premieres and stuff, people always like to send you a MIDI recording of stuff, and they're just god awful. I mean, they're just, I suppose they're helpful in some regard, but at the same time, it never really shows a work in its true light. And it never really gives composers an idea of, okay, that's possible on a computer and that's all nice, but real people who have to breathe and have fingers have to play these notes. And so it doesn't give them an idea of, is this actually physically possible and performable at these tempos with these techniques, what you're specifying. And so what we do is it's an open call, and we do have a panel to kind of adjudicate and we select the pieces. And then what we do is we give these, and there's no age limit on this, because I think it's really important for people of color to understand that age can be a barrier in ways that it may not be for majority culture people.
Yep.
Because they may not have had the opportunities in their younger years to reach a certain level in their career, and has nothing to do with their talent and may have everything to do with external circumstances. And so we've taken that age restriction sort of off of that. And so just giving really talented composers an opportunity to have their piece performed by live musicians and recorded. And so then they're able to use those recordings and shop those out to other orchestras so that those orchestras have a real idea. And it also helps the composers because it becomes part of the editorial process for their works to say, I thought this was really cool at, a quarter equals 285, but actually this is not really playable by human beings. And so they can sort of revise their artistic vision around that. So we found it to be really, really helpful.
Beautiful things there. Glad to hear about this commission in a sea of John Philip Sousa, Red, White, and Blue spectaculars. It's always great for me to hear about other stories that have to do with America at 250. And also just want to underscore and highlight what you said about these age restrictions. I've long been an advocate for taking those away, because while there are some really brilliant composers, I've worked with composers who were 17, 18 years old who are so great because they started composition lessons at 10. While that's phenomenal, when I was 10 years old, I hadn't even started playing an instrument yet. So, we all have different trajectories. And I think it's really important for us to always remember that folks on the older end, I'll say, also deserve those opportunities. So many stories about folks, even in their, there's one composer I'm thinking about, shout out to Augusta Gross, who had a whole career in finance, I believe. And upon retiring, took on composition. So who's to say she doesn't deserve opportunity? So really grateful for that work and that engagement of the work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, and hearing that from you, especially given your work, I mean, that's really affirming to hear that was sort of the right decision. Thank you.
So we're going to talk a little bit about Gateways and Firebird, but I just want to refresh everyone a little bit about you and your background and your work. So, in almost every bio that folks can find online about you, on, historic firsts are named, including your 2005 International Conducting Prize. I wonder if you could take us back to 2005, talk about what it felt like in the moment, and how does that compare to how you think about that moment today?
Thank you. Yes. So, that was such, it was really life-changing. As every artist knows, Jennifer Higdon, when she was teaching at Curtis, I happened to run into her on the street in Philadelphia, and I was really down. And I think this was before I had won the talking. She says, "What's going on?" And I'm like, I'm disgusted with being a conductor, this whole industry. Like, I'm tired. And she says, "Okay, well, you're very talented. You have to hang on." She says, "This is a war of attrition. Whoever lasts the longest wins." And so she's like, "You have to really just find a way to hang in there," and she was so right. And so when I got that call, it was actually from Maren Alsop's partner, Kristen Yorkshire, who runs the administrative part of the fellowship for Maren. And she called and said, "You're the fellow this year. You won." I just broke down in tears. And I said, this came right on time, because I was at the point where I was like, you know what? damn it, I'm just going to quit and become a buyer for Neiman Marcus. Like, I just can't. And I'm just so tired of all of this. And so it really came at a moment where I needed something to say, yes, keep going. This is possible. You can do this. So I'll always be grateful for that. And then the year that I spent with Maren was instructive for so many ways. I mean, the conducting was great, but also in 2006, she had been named the music director for the Baltimore Symphony, the first woman to lead one of the big five, quote unquote, orchestras. And it was not a great initial meeting and response from the Baltimore Symphony people. And it was very public that this was not, they did not publicly embrace her. And so to be very close to that situation by watching her sort of negotiate these sorts of public statements and these public sorts of controversies with such grace and patience and aplomb, that was instructive for me. Because then after I went out on the fellowship trail, I mean, you know, after I went out on the audition trail, after having won the fellowship and, you know, being, you know, the finalist in a number of orchestras and not getting the job. And Loki, you know the story because we've talked about this any number of times about equity and diversity in the American orchestra industry. And having one orchestra say, look, you just don't look like what our audience expects the maestro to look like. It had nothing to do with my talent or my capability. It had everything to do with my gender and race. And so, you know, I kind of went back to Maren and I was like, first of all, I can barely function. I am so furious and disgusted right now. Like it was so depressing and so demoralizing and infuriating and frustrating. It took me a solid year to just get my mind and heart right again and to not act out of anger and to not have a knee-jerk reaction. Because a lot of people are like, you should have just sued them. And what would that have done for my career? What would that have done for them? It would have done nothing. And so it took some time to just cool down. And I consulted with Maren and she's like, you're going to have to start your own group. You're going to have to prove to people, A, that you know how to conduct, B, that, you know, from a financial standpoint, you at the head of an organization is not going to be a money loser. You're just going to have to prove that you can do everything. And so I was like, ugh, so that's how I ended up starting Black Pearl. Because at no point did I want to start an organization, fill out paperwork for the government, raise money. You know, I mean, it's just, you know, when you have an organization, all the administrative tasks that go into it, like we as artists, we don't become artists so that we can, you know, push a pencil on a bunch of government forms all day long. It's just not what gets us up in the morning. And so, you know, I started Black Pearl really not knowing what I was doing. I just knew that I had a vision for what I felt an orchestra should look like, should sound like, what the role of classical music should be in a community, what the role of the orchestra should be for the musicians that are in the orchestra, as well as the audience members who come to see the music and hear the music. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of went on, just guided by that vision, that an orchestra should look like America. It should have everybody in it. It shouldn't just be, you know, one group of people or this group of people. It should really embrace the ideals that this country was founded upon.
And among those ideals that I recognize you put into the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra is this idea of democracy, a democratic structure. We find that verbiage on the website of the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra. How does that manifest? What does that mean for this ensemble?
Sure. So I want to, you know, and Loki, we've known each other for a long time. I want to be real clear. I mean, you know, I'm the conductor and the maestro, so what I say goes. So I mean, you know, we're not crazy about it. Like this orchestra, like, you know, it's not like Orpheus where they just, you know, I'm just for show or something. Sure. But to your point, it is. You know, I am not a violinist. I am not a trumpet player. I am not a percussionist. And I hire the very best musicians from all different backgrounds who graduated from these wonderful conservatories in America and around the world. And why would I not take advantage of their experience and expertise when I have a question or when I'm looking for an answer or want a different perspective, even as the maestro, quote unquote? My job is to take all that input and be the ultimate decider about things because I have a vision of what I want. But I so respect the musicians in my orchestra and I value what they bring to the table. And so, and I think that's what people like when they come to Black Pearl. Like, they're not just sitting in the section and just being robots and being, having to do what they're told and not really being able to bring their whole authentic selves to the music. And that's something so that's what I mean when I say I want people to be their whole authentic selves in my orchestra. I think that makes the music better.
And engaging with musicians in your own orchestra, of course, is different than being the guest conductor in other orchestras. And you have a lot
Very
of
different.
that experience. But with that being said, I would imagine that being the guest conductor for the Gateways Festival Orchestra is different than being the guest conductor for any one of these other orchestras. I wonder how, or at least if you can speak to what that feels like, leaving your own orchestra to go to the Gateways Festival Orchestra, musicians who you don't necessarily know and have the same relationship with, but at the same time isn't the New York Phil, isn't the Boston Symphony, musicians who you may be able to engage with a little differently despite that deep relationship not being there.
Sure. So what's really nice is, my African-American players in my orchestra, they also perform in Gateway. So I always know somebody in the and, you get to know people around. And so there's always friendly faces at Gateways, which is something I appreciate. But then I also appreciate meeting this younger crop of African-American musicians who are, winning jobs at orchestras around the country, who then also come to Gateway. So I get to meet them as well. And so it's building that network. I feel like it's like a giant, employee resource group in like a Black resource group in classical music to go to Gateways and see all these people and connect and have these shared experiences and support one another through the excellence of what we all do in our own individual spheres. First of all, it's always completely professional at Gateways, no matter who's in the orchestra, whether it's my orchestra or anybody else. Again, these people are my friends, but when I'm standing on that podium, friends are not. Like, we are here to do a job, and I respect them and their talent, and I'm there to corral it, and so we can all be the best that we can be. But what I also love is there is room and space when we go to Gateways to lay down being a quote unquote Black classical musician to just being a classical musician, right? Mm-hmm. There isn't that sort of white gaze or the sort of, I used to get the question all the time. Well, I still do, what is it like being a Black female conductor? Have you had any I said, I don't have any problems with being who I am. Apparently other people have problems with who I am and what I do. And then they make that problematic for me. They make their problems mine. Mm-hmm. I don't have any problems. It's not weird to me. I have no experience of being any other kind of conductor. So I have nothing to compare it to. And so I think simply being able to just be who we are and do what we do and love the music with other African Americans who also love what they do and their instrument. I think there's that shared experience that we all really value being at Gateways.
And, when I go into the comment sections of Gateways performances online, there are always Black people in the comments showing prideful shock. I mean, shock, but prideful shock in seeing an all Black ensemble. I feel like the story for so long is proven that we're here. And that story has been told for a long time now. And yet there's still this lack of awareness that comes whenever the Gateways steps out. I wonder, how do you react to the fact that there are still folks, even Black folks, who have never seen an orchestra like Gateways in this way?
I feel, it's, we don't always get to control the narrative. And so whatever the sort of predominant narrative is out there that Black people only do certain things, I think those are the stories that get perpetuated. And that if these are the only stories Black people hear about, then they won't know that there are Black people out there doing everything. And so I think, people would be like, well, in terms of racial equity and the importance of the fight, how does an orchestra, how is that, a civil rights issue? And I think, Martin Luther King and Malcolm, like all these people came before us so that we have the right to follow our dreams, just like any other American has the right to follow their dreams and to be wherever we want to be. And for everything in this world to belong to us as much as it belongs to anyone else in this world, no matter what their race or gender identity or sexual orientation is, that we all have a right to be where we want to be, to do what we want to do. And so Gateways, I think, becomes a visual symbol of that sort of, look, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is the American dream. Gateways, Black Pearl, Sphinx. This is the American dream. Castle of our skins. All these kinds of things. We have the right to follow our bliss just like anyone else does.
And you have the honor of leading the Gateways Festival Orchestra in a performance of Firebird that includes actual choreography of full expression of this piece. Firebird is, what I would consider one of those war horses. Most, if not all of us, have engaged this piece many times, but not necessarily with the dance component. I wonder how you're preparing for this iteration of Firebird.
It's so exciting. And you're absolutely right. Like, we all know Firebird, but how many times do we actually get to do it with the dancers? And there's so many ballet scores that, people love and know the music to, but how often do you get to see the Gesamtkunstwerk of the full ballet with the dancers and the sets and the lighting along with the music? So preparation for this has been so interesting. Dance Theatre of Harlem is an icon, in the dance world and also in the Black community. There's such a foundational institution. And so preparing for this has been very interesting because, back in the 80s, they did a whole documentary about their Firebird. And so there's that tradition that they have of that original, and they have the full performance in there so you can see it. So there are those tempos for the music. But now they've been doing it. I think they've been touring their Firebird for a while around, and it's finally now coming back to New York in April, where Gateways is going to be in the pit supporting them. But these are a new set of dancers. And so there's a different tempo, there's a different style. And so while it's all the same music, there are things that are different to accommodate the expressivity of these particular dancers in this. And so being able to listen and watch these dancers and how they interact with one another, and to make sure that the timing of the music and the elements of the music are so aligned with their movements and with their emotions. It's been really a lot of fun to work on this.
So I guess I predict on your part a lot of orchestra. I know that you're used to playing it this way, but yes, this is the tempo for this performance.
Exactly. And but that's always the case with ballet. Sometimes, the composers, because again, they know, like, these are pieces that exist sometimes or can be used or modified to exist outside of the ballet component, where they have the vision of their tempos, and that's how it goes. And I think, again, when we're orchestra musicians and we're used to playing this on the stage without the dancers, we get accustomed to this tempo, this pacing, that kind of thing. And so it's a very different situation when you've got bodies moving in three-dimensional space and time that has to go along with that. Yeah.
And I think Firebird programmatically can easily speak to themes of Black struggle and resilience, Black rebirth. I could really go in my head and be woo-woo about it for sure. I wonder how you're thinking about this work from that programmatic perspective, not just the notes and rhythms, but how this applies to our stories, our experiences.
Well, there are so many stories of magical creatures assisting humans in their struggles. And I think the thing that I come back to in the context of your question is, the capturing of the Firebird and seeing how beautiful and powerful this creature is, and that the prince releases her and she rewards him by giving him her magic feather. I think, in the context of slavery in America, it becomes a painful reminder that people had been incapable of seeing the beauty and the magic and the power and the potentiality of Black bodies, and decided it was more profitable to capture and control that rather than creating partnerships, rather than creating collaborative, and you know what I'm saying? And so I think, you know, it becomes a powerful lesson in seeing potentiality and promise in everyone that we meet, and rather than controlling it, appreciating it, and valuing it and setting it free, and then planting those seeds of respect that may come back to benefit you later when you need it.
That's right. And, you know, this partnership with the Dance Theatre of Harlem makes me think about, you know, not only the convergence of the two organizations and all of the artists that, you know, the bassoonist that gets to talk with the dancer, who gets to talk with the costumer, but also the audiences that these two organizations will introduce to each other. I don't feel like we often get Black people who are so interested in dance sitting next to Black folks who have a history and an engagement with classical music. I wonder how you're thinking about that aspect, the audience aspect. What are some of the benefits of these two groups of Black folks coming together in this context?
You know, I think just the audiences mingling themselves. And again, like you said, you know, these audiences can be so siloed. Like you have the Black dance audience, and then, you know, maybe just the separate Black classical music audience. And in our minds as artists who are kind of floating in between these worlds, it seems strange to me that these audiences would be separate, because there seems to be so much overlap in the dance world with classical music in terms of the repertoire and traditional ballet. And yet at the same time, people are they're very parochial. They're very loyal to the institutions because they may have a personal connection. Like maybe they studied dance when they were little. Maybe they studied bassoon when they were little. And so they don't tend to maybe cross over because there aren't those personal historical connections to an organization or an art form. And so I think just bringing those audiences together, again, you begin to see that Black people are everywhere and love all kinds of different things. And I think it's important that white institutions also see that these audiences exist, that they're out there, that they buy tickets, that they support the arts. I remember when I started Black Pearl, this was at the time when President Obama was campaigning. And I think he had just, you know, we had kind of finished the Democratic primary and he'd beaten out Hillary Clinton. So he was definitely the candidate. And I was at a fundraiser for him, and I was talking to this, you know, very enthusiastic, you know, wealthy white woman. And she's, oh, what do you do? I said, I'm starting an orchestra. She says, oh, you're not going to get any money from Black people for that. She says, Black people don't support the arts. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what is happening right now? Like, she could envision a world where we have the first Black president, but in her mind, Black people don't support the arts. Black people don't give money to things. And she's saying this to someone who had just written a check for President, like, you know, so it's this weird sort of idea that Black people just don't do things because white people don't see it. And so again, to think that something doesn't exist because you're not seeing it with your own eyes is it's a very common misperception. And so I think to have this sort of amassing, this sort of critical mass of Black audiences between ballet and classical music can really be eye-opening for majority institutions, I think.
Yeah. And I also think about the folks who are of money, of financial privilege, that seem to pop out when we have these sorts of things. I remember when I saw the Metropolitan Opera's premiere of X, there were so many, you know, Whoopi Goldberg was there. Nas, the rapper, was there. You know, I bumped shoulders with Lena Waithe. All these folks were there. At the same time, as that was being celebrated, there were a lot of folks uptown where I live saying, oh, well, Malcolm X really have us in the Metropolitan Opera. But, you know, there's always that critique that is on the periphery of opportunities like these. When I think about that conversation as it applies to this upcoming collaboration, I can't help but to think about critics who might say, oh, you have a Black orchestra, you have the Dance Theatre of Harlem, and you have this work by a white composer. Why couldn't it have been a Black composition? I wonder how you would respond to that. Why is it important for Firebird specifically to be at the center of this?
I think Firebird, first of all, was so foundational to introducing Dance Theatre of Harlem to the world. Like I said, that documentary in the 80s was just amazing to see this collaboration, to see the precision and the discipline of these beautiful dancers, to see the costumes. Because again, people didn't think Black bodies could do ballet, were designed to do ballet, were qualified to do ballet. I mean, look at Misty Copeland being the first Black lead dancer for American ballet, And so again, there was, and so I think the message of Firebird in particular in this moment is that these art forms continue to be for everybody and that everybody can enjoy them. Personally, I feel like Stravinsky had a little bit of Black in him. I mean, I love, he's one of my all-time favorite composers. I think his use of rhythm, his ability to incorporate like the aesthetics of Cubism in the way that he treats, themes and motives, just kind of spinning them kind of a little bit at a time so that you're seeing these different perspectives and the motives sort of emerge over time through these different rhythmic iterations. I find him to be brilliant. He was also a jazz lover. When I think about, oh gosh, I'm blanking. This is so embarrassing. This is what happens when you do an interview, everybody out there, and you haven't had breakfast yet. The ebony concerto and like things like that. Right. He was just such a wonderfully, and these are things that he loved. He was someone who loved new experiences, who loved experimenting with things. And so I think he would have really loved that particular collaboration with Dance Theatre of Harlem, seeing those costumes, seeing his work being done. I think he would have enjoyed that.
One of the things that I've experienced a lot as an artist, I'm sure you've experienced, once you do this big thing, there's no scaling back. The next thing that you think of or envision is bigger and bigger and bigger. There's always growth. So as you approach this performance, I wonder, what is it inspiring in you beyond this collaboration? What visions do you have for future engagement with Gateways, ways that you can utilize the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra or otherwise?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you have, there's so many, as you know, Loki, there's so many connections just personally between, Gateways and Sphinx and Castle of Our Skins, and all these organizations, we all have these shared experiences of working so hard at our craft to achieve, the very pinnacles of what we can do. And yet there's always more to be done. And I feel like for me, what becomes incumbent upon us to go back to, your opening question of how do you find joy away from the fight for justice is continuing to build these relationships, continuing to build community in ways that mutually supports our artistic excellence, but also our spiritual growth and our sense of safety and community in what is becoming an increasingly divisive world. Mm-hmm. I think the era that we're in, people have become more emboldened to activate and how do I say this? Put hate into their public policy, to put oppression back on the table in terms of how America treats its own citizens, let alone new Americans and people coming to this country seeking asylum. And so I think for me, what I find joy in is creating this sort of underground railroad of joy and community and artistic expression, and so that we can continue to support each other and can continue to show the way for younger generations that this is how we fight in America, that everybody doesn't have to take up guns, everybody doesn't have to take up cameras to film ICE or something. Again, however people want to fight, that's mm-hmm. how they want to fight. As for me, I would prefer that it be nonviolent and political and expressive in nature. And so, we as artists continuing to support one another. I mean, my gosh, it would be amazing to create. I mean, I would love for there to be some kind of great sort of performance tour network of these organizations where we're collaborating with one another, sharing musicians, creating audiences for the messages that we have, and using our art to spread the word about what democracy looks like and who we are as Americans, whether it's here in America or even abroad. I would love to see that.
Well, let's make it happen. How can people keep up with your future work, including upcoming Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra performances?
Thank you. I have my own website, Jeri Lynne Johnson, JeriLynne Johnson.com. That's my personal website. I tried to update it, but life happens. Then, of course, Dance Theatre of Harlem. Please go to check out their website. You can see the schedule for all the Firebird performances. There's 4 of them. I also want to mention that the wonderful, dynamic, and personal hero of mine, Tanya Leone, is conducting, because she has such a long history with them, composing music for them and collaborating with them. So she's actually doing the gala performance where I think it's just the Firebird and then a great big old party afterwards. So she's doing one night. So please, that's also very exciting. I'm so proud to be supporting her in that. But then there's 4 total performances, and I'll be doing the first and all the rest of them. And like I said, Tanya Maestro Leone is doing that other one on the 17th, I believe it is. But you can go to Dance Theatre of Harlem. That's theater, THEATRE of Harlem, and find their website and find the schedule for performances. Obviously, Gateways Music Festival. Please check them out to see what they've got going on. I think they're starting their festival season. They have a lot going on. The Gateways Brass Collective is all over the country. They're an amazing group of African-American brass players. And they're all friends. They're all wonderful performers. So please, if you can catch them where you're at next time they're in your town, please, I highly recommend them. And then Black Pearl, I have to say, Loki, we are undertaking the first ever logo and branding exercise. I never spend money on marketing. It's always been word of mouth. And so this is the first time we're actually spending money on marketing and branding. And so we're going to have a new website pretty soon, which I'm so looking forward to. But you can check us out at Black Pearl Co. That's blackpearlco.org.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, where I wanted to wrap up and reviewing our last conversation in preparation for this interview, I remembered that you have a background not only in music, but in religious studies, specifically East Asian religion. As a practicing Buddhist myself, one of the things that I'm always thinking about is, we have this concept, the mutual possession of the 10 worlds. Among those 10 worlds is the world of Ashuras, or anger. And, within that, there are all of the other 10 worlds, including what's more positive and beneficial. So doing something with anger toward positive motion is something that's not only very much possible, but almost an obligation. We began this conversation with your talking about how you transformed your anger, your frustration with the field into something that gave birth to the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra. So I wonder, to the many musicians, the Black musicians, the women, the marginalized out there feeling that frustration right now, I wonder what words you might offer to them to transform that into something that is useful to them.
Yeah, that's first of all, it's very beautifully put. So thank you. And you're exactly right. That transforming, I call it transforming grit into grace. That was why Black Pearl was named what it was. A pearl is formed when an oyster gets a little bit of grit inside, and then it kind of layers it with mother of pearl, and that's what creates the pearl, and a thing of priceless beauty. And so I think one of the capacities that sometimes has been a little overdeveloped in people of color community in America, the trans and the LGBTQIA plus community, is really that capacity to, like I say, transform grit into grace. It is a survival mechanism. It is not a privilege. And I think it speaks to the resilience of these various communities that we continue to survive by creating beauty out of pain. I would love for us to be able to just create beauty out of other beauty, And, but I think as the human condition, I think this is something that we've developed as human beings as a way to make sense of our world. And in thinking about stuff that you and I have talked about, for me, what causes all of this pain is just the illusion of form. And people think a thing is a thing, and it's just not a thing. People think their ideas and their thoughts and their feelings and their perceptions are real and important, and they're just not real. And I think as musicians, we learn this in the craziest way. I was a pianist. I'm a pianist, and so for me, middle C was a thing. Like that's how I oriented myself along the keyboard. It was a physical place in three-dimensional space and time. And then, the more you get into conducting and you learn that, middle C is different for every instrument and it looks different on the page depending on what transposition. And so transposition for me was one of the greatest lessons in Buddhism, was letting go of this illusion of form and really being flexible. And, that sort of orientation around an idea can always be flexible as long as you're getting towards a deeper spiritual reality. And so just kind of always honing in on that, I think is one of the ways that people are able to transform that grit into grace, is always striving for that vision of something more perfect and more beautiful for not just yourself, but for everyone you come in contact with.
That is the conclusion to Igor Stravinsky's Firebird. That excerpt and the one you heard before my chat with Jeri Lynne Johnson, brought to you by the London Symphony Orchestra under the legendary Leopold Stokowski. So hope you enjoyed that. I have links to that specific recording in the description of this opus if you're interested in checking that out. But really, really great piece of music. I still remember the very first time I performed the Firebird. It was actually a last minute thing. I was still an undergraduate, and one of the bassoonists in the Jackson Symphony Orchestra in the nearby city of Jackson, near close to Memphis, got sick or something. And I got a call from Chris Jackson. Shout out to Chris, legendary bassoonist. He's with one of the military bands now. Anyway, he called me. He said, look, they need a bassoonist real quick. Just drive up. We're playing this piece called Firebird. It'll be fine. You can do it. So I drove up. There was a quick rehearsal with just the bassoons and the conductor, because there are a couple tricky little spots in it. And that's how I was introduced to the piece of music. Of course, for folks who really know, there's a really beautiful bassoon solo in the piece, the beautiful lullaby of the Firebird. But one of those important works in the catalog. I'm always a champion for the new music and the living composers, but if there are works from the so-called canon that I think we should not let go by the wayside, it's definitely the Firebird suite, along with many of Stravinsky's other works. So yeah, thanks again to Maestro Jeri Lynne Johnson for joining me. Definitely excited about these performances by the Gateways Festival Orchestra in collaboration with the Dance Theatre of Harlem. You can get your tickets. I have a link to that in the description of this opus as well. So for the brief Trilloquy, I'm thinking about one of the things that Jeri put forward at the end of our dialogue: grit into grace. This is a key aspect of the Firebird. Of course, we have this bird, according to legend, that burns and burns until it burns out. But it's from that burnout, it's from those ashes that it can rise again and to be reborn. As I think about that, I think about burnout as it relates to work and to life. Burnout is very, very real. I'm sure you've felt it. I've definitely felt it. But rebirth is also real. Finding that one extra feather, that one thing that you can do. For me, when it comes to my making sure that I'm keeping my musicianship up, is that one Instagram video. I don't know what it is for you, but that one thing that you can do to just plant that seed, to keep that little ember burning, can be the very thing it takes for you to be reborn and imagined. Of course, there's lots of Buddhism in that, as Jeri was pointing out, rebirth, impermanence, all of these things are key. But I think most importantly, we have to think about the joy and the happiness of all of this. Just as she began the chat with, being a soldier for equity doesn't have to be something that is a burden or the source of burning out. It can be the source of happiness. So hope you'll take from that what you may. If you're feeling burnout, find that one just ember that's in all of those ashes to put on some new dry leaves, some to use that to light the stove, whatever metaphor you want to use, because that's always the thing that can keep things going. Winter always turns to spring, as I like to say. We're in winter right now in many ways across society. Maybe you're in winter in your life right now, but let's joyfully embrace what we got to do to get through this proverbial winter, because spring is coming. And across many parts of the country, literally speaking, spring is here. I was in Boston this past weekend, and it's still cold there, but but we'll get there. Hope that's encouraging in some way. Thanks again to Jeri Lynne Johnson for your phenomenal work, and for helping us understand that grit into grace is an important thing for us to remember and hold close. Thank you again for tuning in. Always a pleasure to have you listening to the TRILLOQUY podcast. You can check out more past opuses, and you can contribute to this project at trilloquy.org, TRILLOQY.org. More from me here soon, and maybe in the next week or so. But until then, peace.